I'd just like to welcome BT Smart Cities. And we're delighted to welcome Ian Neild, John Davies, Laura Russell, Carol Fletcher and Pam Poppe from the Adastral Park.
Thank you, Leon, for that introduction. So welcome, everybody. This is day 2 of our virtual British Science Week live Q&A. So yesterday we did cybersecurity, and today it's the turn of smart cities. So I'm really pleased that we've got 4 smart cities experts with us today. We've got John Davies, Ian Neild and Laura Russell from BT, and we've got Nikolai Mendeleev from the University of Manchester. So if you'd like to ask a question to one of our expert panel, if you can use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and type your question in. So just while you're having a chance to think of your questions, I'm just going to go around the panel and get them all to introduce themselves. So John, would you like to go first, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carol. So yeah, my name's John Davies. I work at BT at our Research and Development Centre at Adastral Park near Ipswich. And I lead a team looking at Internet of Things technologies and the way they're applied in all sorts of different areas, including smart cities. The Internet of Things, basically, the idea is there's lots of sensors out there in the environment, sensing loads of data and sending all that data back to the internet, where we can analyse it and do cool things with it.
That's lovely. Thanks, John. And Laura, would you like to go next?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Laura. I'm a 3rd year research apprentice with BT in the research department, and I'm currently in John's team, and I'm looking at I'm working on a project all to do with farms and robots, which is very cool.
Thanks, Laura. Ian.
So I'm Ian Neild. I work for BT in applied research, and I'm investigating how we use Internet of Things for smart cities. So I'm particularly interested in air qualities and environmental sensors. I came to BT as a graduate a few years ago, but I've carried on my learning and, well, just keep learning.
That's lovely. Thanks, Ian. And finally, Nikolai, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikolai Mekhanjiev. At the moment, I'm a professor of enterprise information systems at University of Manchester in the Alliance Manchester Business School. So what I do for a living is I teach, but I also research, and they both interest me of equal measure. In terms of in the way of research, I've been working with John actually for a number of years. We've been working on a number of projects related to Internet of Things, but also to software services. And my current research interest is digital transformation and artificial intelligence. And I also lead the Data Visualization Observatory. You might have seen the video of on the web pages there. So.
Lovely. Thank you all very much. So just a reminder to everyone on the call, if you'd like to ask a question, if you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But we've got some questions in already. So first one I'm going to ask is for you, Laura. And it says, Laura, can you tell us a bit more about the farm project that you're working on?
Yeah. So it's actually called Robot Highways, which is a little bit confusing because you kind of think that would involve roads, but actually no, it involves strawberries. But BT is basically collaborating with all universities and a robotics company called Saga, who are creating these amazing robots that do things like pick the fruit. They instead of spraying it, they use UV light to kind of get rid of any nasties on it. And what BT is doing is we are kind of creating the network infrastructure for it and kind of doing stuff with the data that the robots collect and putting it onto this thing called the edge, which is like near the internet but not quite, and doing cool things to the data to make it look nice and that we can understand it.
Lovely. Thanks, Laura. That sounds like a really exciting project to be involved with. So next question, I think it's possibly one for you, Ian. If the air sensors that you were talking about in your video are in towns and cities, what about the countryside? How do you get readings for the entire UK?
So the traffic pollution, it comes from traffic. So where we have a buildup of traffic, that can be cars idling. That's where you have traffic problems, and that's generally in the cities and built-up areas. Because we have, it's called an urban canyon, where the buildings and the houses surrounding the streets actually trap the pollution. So it's more of a problem in the cities, and that's also where we're walking past and getting impacted. In the wider areas, if you're down the M1, the A1, the A14, the traffic's moving and it's nice and open. So you don't need as dense an array of sensors. So there you can use satellites, which will cover a large space. but you get a broader picture, and you don't know the height. So it's more impactful to us in cities. So that's why we're concentrating in the cities.
And a follow-on, which I think is also for you, Ian. In your video, you mentioned the Line project in Saudi Arabia. Can you just describe what that is for us?
I'm trying to remember now. So that looks like it's Saudi Arabia, isn't it? So they are looking at their future smart city, and not like we have, where our cities have evolved outwards. They're actually building it along a straight line. So no cars, all connected by trains and sort of monorails, and you go on the train to the next sort of city along. So that's their vision of a future smart city.
Oh, John, I think John wants to come in on that one as well.
I was just gonna say on that, it's quite an interesting concept. As Ian was saying, it's completely different to what we think of as traditional cities today that have grown up over time. It's almost a straight line. It's going to be about 105 miles long, and it's going to have 1 million residents, and it's going to be entirely powered by renewable energy sources, obviously mainly solar power, because in Saudi Arabia you have a lot of energy available to you from the sun. So yeah, a completely different way of thinking about cities to what we traditionally think of. Also, a lot of it, I understand, a lot of it will be underground as well. So you'll stay out of the sun's glare, because a lot of the city and the transport layer will be all underground. So a really fascinating project, completely, rethinking what we think of as a city.
Excellent. So it sounds like a good one that to put into an internet search engine to find out a bit more about if anyone is interested. The next question, which I think I'm going to ask to both John and to Nikolai, and it is, when do you think we will see fully smart cities in the UK?
Oh, that's a good question. So actually, that kind of relates to what I was just saying. I mean, with the line in Saudi Arabia, they've got a great advantage, of course, because they're building it all from scratch. So from day one, it will be a smart city. They will have loads of data collected from sensors. It will be carbon neutral, as I said, which is great as well. And they can build all that from the ground up, because they're starting from nothing. Of course, in a more traditional city like Manchester or London, there's a lot of infrastructure already there. All the buildings are already there. So there's more work to do in a way to kind of uplift those existing buildings, roads, energy systems to be fully smart. So it partly depends, of course, what do you mean by a fully smart city? But I think we're starting to see more and more sensor technology, air quality sensors, which Ian is a specialist in, but also transport, weather sensors, all kinds of other sensors going into smart cities. And so I think you'll see with traditional cities, not like the Line in Saudi Arabia, you'll see them gradually evolve to become smarter and smarter. I don't think we're there yet by a long way. I think we basically know how to do a lot of it, but it will take a while. Investment is required and time is required. So I would have thought in 10 years' time, a lot of the cities that we see today, the traditional cities that we see today, will look very different to how they look now.
Okay, and I can just add that on one side we have the technology for smart cities, and on the other side we have the way this technology changes the way the businesses operate and the way the society functions as a whole. And the technology would be there first. Okay, it's much easier in many ways to introduce the technology than to find the appropriate business models for the way things work and to change the behavior of the citizens, and also to fit, as some of the questions looking forward point out, to the privacy implications of the smart city technology as well. So this will take a bit longer.
Yeah, if I can, I'm going to come in with a question just related to that last point you mentioned there, Nikolai, and it's, how do smart cities operate within GDPR? So GDPR, of course, are the data protection regulations, which mean that we all have to give consent if we're going to share our data with another organization. So how do smart cities, how are they affected by GDPR?
Well, in other words, first of all, we have to establish whether there is a sharing of personal data happening. Mm-hmm. And if you're just if we are only measuring things like the flow of traffic, then we're not capturing any information about individual participants. Some of these measurements are based on recognizing your Bluetooth number, your special Bluetooth ID, but it is up to the some of these measuring systems also designed so that they discard this identifier as soon as possible. So if, again, there is no capturing of personal data. So there are some technologies which are being developed to actually reduce the impact of smart city technologies on privacy.
Thank you. And going back to the air quality, Ian, I think this next one is a question for you, and it's a really good one actually. And it's, how does pollution move?
It blows around. So it's produced by burning fuels, so that's petrol and diesel, but it blows around. So as the cars are moving, they're generating a little bit of wind, but we also have wind naturally there, and the rain can wash it away. So we were involved in one trial where some data analysts looked at the data and they could see a reduction in air quality of the pollution on the second day. So they thought their traffic light changes had an improvement, until we went into our data exchange, which is where we put the data in and put the security and privacy parts to it. And we pulled in the data and said, well, on day 2, the wind was coming from the southwest and it started to rain midday. So where they thought they'd actually improved the air quality, they hadn't. It was just they hadn't taken an impact of the weather. And that's why smart cities, they are getting smarter and they're collecting more data. We share it in our data exchanges. We put the security and the privacy wrappers on it, and then more people can write applications around it to get those benefits. And that question about when the smart city comes, they are getting smarter. And as we roll out more sensors and our BT street hubs, we start making cities smarter. But it'll be interesting what we call a smart city today to 10 years time. So some of our people watching us now, they were born 2007, 13 years ago when that first iPhone came out. If I was to say that was a smartphone today, you'd look at me and think I was a bit sad. So I think that the smart cities of the future that you're looking at, you're thinking about for you, I think it's different to what I think is smart.
Okay. Thanks, Ian. And Laura, a question for you here. If I want to have a career working in smart cities or the Internet of Things, what sorts of skills might I need to do that?
I think an interest in it more than anything. I think that's how I kind of got myself into this team, was by saying that this stuff is really cool, and I did some work experience in this team, and get out there, get Googling.
And what sorts of skills have you developed since you've been working in the team?
Well, I've never been much of a coder, and I normally somewhat avoid it. But I've been using a tool called Node-RED, which is really great for visualizing data and creating dashboards that are really engaging and useful. And I've also kind of learned all about using Linux terminal command things to talk to robots and kind of get into the robot's head, so to speak. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Nikolai, a question for you. What are the future plans for Manchester's digital twin that you mentioned in your video? Will it be open to the public?
Well, okay, there's 2 aspects of it. First of all is the actual room, the Data Visualization Observatory, where it is located, is a 7-meter diameter room. So when we say the public, obviously we have some limitations of how many people can go in there and for what reason and what projects we're going to do. But the other part of the dimension is that the Manchester digital twin does not need to live in our Data Visualization Observatory. It could be, it is developed in Unity. Unity is a very popular game engine. You can feasibly port it onto your own computer. You can even think of some web-based delivery mechanisms for it. So we are not keeping it necessarily confidential. I mean, it is based on an open source data as well, but we obviously, we do not think it's robust enough at the moment to just be distributing it around, and there's obviously issues with some of the issues about where we got the data from, is the data fully open source, and so on. So eventually we will get to that point, but at the moment I think it is for meant to power research collaborations and research investigations.
Thank you, Nikolai. John, I've now got a question for you that's come in, and it is, if you have lots of sensors in a smart city, how are you able to read all of the data and then make sense of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Ian mentioned a minute ago our data exchange, and that's some software that we've been working on for 2 or 3 years now, actually, and we've tested it in Manchester in a smart city application, and also in Milton Keynes as well. And that software, that data exchange system, is set up to be able to take in lots of data from sensors, the data that's arriving very quickly. So it might be a sensor telling you the temperature in a particular location every 5 seconds, say. So that data is pinging into the data exchange really quickly. And there could be several hundred such data feeds in a smart city, but it's set up to be scalable, to be able to handle that volume of data arriving quite quickly. And then when the data exchange receives the data from all the sensors, what it does is it transforms it into a single format, and that makes it really easy then for people who want to build like smartphone apps that use the data, for example. Makes it really easy for those people to access the data that they need for their particular application. So we get all kinds of different data in the data exchange. It could be, transport, health, pollution, weather, etc., etc. And then people can come along and combine all that data and do interesting and innovative applications with it. So that's how we get all the data together and make it easy for people to find the data that they need.
Thanks, John. And Laura, another one for you. In the farm project, have you found anything unexpected or unusual in the data?
So we haven't got the data yet, because we're kind of creating kind of the environment, the network environment that the robots will be kind of in. But we have made our own little robots. They're called burger bots because they kind of look like a burger because they're stacked. And we use this thing called ROS, the robotic operating system, to kind of pull out different bits of information from the robot. And yeah, no, there are some funky things that come out of it, but mainly it seems like speed and like the time that it's moving. But we will investigate if there are any.
I guess if we ask you this question for next British Science Week next year, you'd be able to tell us a bit more about what you found out. Brilliant. Thank you. And another question for Nikolai. This is another great question. We've had some really good ones in today. What makes the digital twin different to, say, combining different applications on Google? So maybe, putting together, say, Google Maps with the government coronavirus website or something like that, the data on there. What makes the digital twin different to doing that?
Well, normally digital twin is powered by the simulation. If you look at the video of our digital twin, you have all the cars, and the cars contribute to the air pollution. So you have some underlying intelligence and interaction between all the different data sets which you are displaying on top. So this is what this is behind the idea of a digital twin, is that these data sets will be powering some sort of simulation-based functionality inside, which will make it behave like a little bit more like the real system.
Thank you. And Ian, one for you. If I wanted to get started and I wanted to experiment with putting some sensors, say, around my house or around my school, what kind of thing could I start with, and what sorts of things could I do with them?
So the easiest sensors to hook up are temperature sensors, because a lot of your computers or devices have got those in already. Your smartphones, some of those, you can have apps which will make that data readily available. And then you can get that out in text files and start using it with spreadsheets, or you can start going from the examples like Laura talks about with Node-RED. Raspberry Pi and Microbit have got masses of amounts of people behind them, forums, where they've got tutorials, they'll help you get started with it. And you can do quite complex things. So I've got temperature sensors on some of the pipes in my house. So I can detect the temperature of the water coming in. It goes into the boilers, it goes into radiators. It was interesting seeing just how much water I'm using when I'm heating it up. So my boiler was warming up 100 litres of water every day, and it wasn't getting emptied all the time. So I was wasting a lot of hot water. When my daughter went in and had a shower, then she would use a couple hundred liters at a time because I couldn't get her out. So I started showing her the graphs, and it's sort of interesting showing her where the data goes. So temperatures starting off with, but look on the Raspberry Pi forums, the microbits, your school's computing clubs, and they'll give you the helping hand to get started to get those knots and ones.
Lovely, thank you very much, Ian. And it's interesting to hear a nice real application in your home. So I guess you've saved on your water bill now since you put those sensors in.
I've lost a daughter, but I've saved them all.
An interesting question now about security. I'm going to come to you for this one, John. So what are some of the security risks that are linked to smart cities and increasing data collection? So for example, could monitoring congested areas mean that criminals avoid those areas and carry out crimes in other places? How can some of the security issues be avoided?
Okay, so there's two things there, I think, if I understood the question right. There's the security of the systems themselves, and then there's the wider social implications, as you say. So taking that first one first, the second one first, sorry, the social implications. As you say, if data available to criminals can be useful intelligence to them and help them to target areas where there aren't many people, for example. But conversely, I would say that the security benefits of IoT systems far outweigh those potential risks, because we're starting to see IoT increasingly coming into smart homes now. So you can have, security cameras that you can monitor from your smartphone wherever you are in the world. You can see what's happening in your house or outside, in the driveway or the garden or whatever it may be. We've also got door opening detection sensors and other types of motion detection sensors that we can put in the house, more sophisticated locks. So yeah, there's all sorts of things where IoT is helping those sorts of security issues, which I think would outweigh any benefit that might be available from greater intelligence about how crowded particular areas are. So that's one thing, the sort of social side, if you like. And then on the IT side itself, one of the interesting things, of course, with IoT is you've got a lot of IT sensors and small computers. They're right at the edge of the network. So in other words, they're physically, they're not on somebody's premises necessarily. They might be scattered throughout a city in public places. They're often always switched on. They're often always connected to the network as well. And those kind of factors make them a particularly interesting security risk. Because of those features. Yes, that's very different to having some data stored in a secure data center. With physical and electronic security in place. So what we're working on is a number of techniques that can help with that, which are quite complex. It's hard, to get into the detail of them today would be tricky, but some of them are based on blockchain technology. Kind of what that means in a nutshell is that once a sensor records a piece of data, that data is stored and it's impossible to change that data or interfere with it in any way without somebody knowing about that. Yeah, it's quite complex, but we're looking at special security measures for these kinds of IT systems where there are lots of sensors out there.
Lovely, thank you, John. Thank you. That was a great question to whoever sent that one in, and some more great questions. And I think there's a couple here that are sort of linked, and I'm going to ask them to you, Nikolai. And specifically about the work in Manchester. How many sensors have been placed around Manchester to create the model, and what are the environmental implications? So, what's the lifespan of the sensors, and are they recyclable at the end of their lives?
Well, the data we have at the moment in digital twin is based only on two sensors, one in Manchester Piccadilly and the other one in Manchester Oxford Road. I understand at the moment we have more like 100 sensors deployed in different parts of the Manchester, but we still haven't, this is still not operational, we still haven't activated them in it. And this is only about the air quality. The transport is a totally different thing. We have about 6,000 Bluetooth sensors around the town. We don't feed information from all of them. You also have traffic monitoring systems which already exist in Manchester, like the Scoot system. So you have induction loops built into the tarmac, which basically sends the metal mass of cars going on top of it, and it can pretty accurately detect that whether that is a individual car or whether it is a trailer, a truck with a trailer, how big the car. So it can estimate the volume of traffic going through that point, but without detecting individual vehicles, which kind of comes back to my previous point. So we do have sensors where normally when we try to do these things, we don't try to deploy our own sensors. We try just to bring in sensors which Transport for Greater Manchester, Manchester City Council already have in place for other purposes, and to use the data that way. So this has been our strategy on this side.
So what BT's doing, we have future pay funds which are going out, and there's thousands of those on the high street. By using those as our sensing points, we don't have to put batteries in, and we don't have to put plastic cases on or make them ruggedized because they're protected inside these kiosks. And one of the things that we are researching is we don't have to put batteries in. So I've got a number of sensors which don't actually have batteries in. These are powered by the light around us. You can power things from heat, from actual motion. And this sensor is, I think it's about 2004, 2005. So it's 15, 16 years old. So that's older than many people on this call. I've never had to put a battery on those, and it just keeps working. But yes, e-waste, good question. No batteries included.
Thank you, Ian. So it sounds like we can use smart cities to make the cities more environmentally friendly, and the things we have to deploy to do that aren't necessarily going to be bad for the environment either, which is really good to hear. I've got a couple of questions here, which I'm going to ask to you, Laura, because they relate to, you mentioned you joined BT as an apprentice. First of all, do you offer apprenticeships, and how do I apply? And secondly, to work at BT, do I need to take computing, or is it something that I could learn?
So yes, there are apprenticeships. Most definitely, please apply. This year's intake, I think, has already been, Carol?
Yeah.
So you'd be applying for next year. But in terms of computing, I never did any computing before I joined BT. I joined straight out A-levels, but I didn't do any computing in A-levels or GCSE. So no. I mean, to be fair, on my first day, I didn't know how to turn on my laptop, but that was independent of computing. It was just me not knowing where the button was. But over time, you definitely just pick up everything, and it's definitely a motto that myself and other cohorts and people in my year have gone by. So there's no such thing as a silly question. So you're an apprentice. You're not expected to know everything. So no, you don't need to know computing before you get here. At least from my experience. But yeah.
Lovely, thank you, Laura. And just that's a nice segue into there's no such thing as a silly question. So if you've got any more questions, please do click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type your question in for us. So I've got a question here which about it could be for Ian, or it could be for Nicola, it could be for both of you. So are the readings on air pollution, are they affected by the amount of factories that there are in an area?
Nicola, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Well, I can provide the common sense answer, which seems to be if these factories are air polluting factories, then they'll be affected by the direct mechanism of factories polluting the air. I think in Manchester context, where these sensors are located, they're mostly affected by traffic. And we had there was a project with BT to which Manchester University played only peripheral role, which was exactly trying to redirect traffic away from the city centre to avoid the areas of worst pollution on this side. So it's mostly traffic pollution in Manchester at the moment, but yeah, sure. Ian, do you have?
So the reason why we have a lot more air quality sensors now comes from the 1950s, when we used to burn a lot more coal in our homes and factories, and it caused a lot more pollution. And until we sort of moved to more electric and gas and nuclear power, we burnt a lot more coal, and that gave rise to sulfur dioxide. So we used to have problems with sulfur dioxide in the UK, but now I think there's only 2 councils who have got air quality management enforcements in place for it. Nitrogen dioxide is now the major one, and we don't really get that from factories. That's from burning fuels. You can get it from burning gas, but it's not as much. It's, that would happen at power stations way out in the middle of nowhere. So it's not really factories causing those sorts of pollutions, but they are energy users. So one of the big things that BT is keen on reducing is CO2. So anytime we use energy, whether that's burning gas or electricity, there is a CO2 impact. And all of the energy that BT uses for its data centers and its exchanges comes from green sources. So we're very big on reducing that. And I think by 2030, our fleet's going to be electric as well. So all of us are trying to reduce our CO2.
Fantastic, thanks, Ian. And another question here about the sensors is, can sensors made by different companies or different brands work together, or do they only work with ones that are the same as they are?
Is that
like standards?
I'm going to leave that open to the floor.
That sounds like a standards question, John.
Well, yeah, okay. So it depends what level you're talking about in a nutshell. I mean, when you deploy a sensor, what you're interested in, of course, is the data that sensor sends you. And as I was saying previously, we have in BT this idea of a data exchange that can take data from multiple sensors and transform it so that it's all in kind of like one format. And part of that transformation can be things like, you know, if you've got a temperature sensor measuring temperature in Fahrenheit and one in centigrade, it can translate them both to centigrade so that we're always looking at consistent data. Similarly, if you've got sensors in particular locations or in a vehicle which is moving around, obviously it's really important to be able to record those locations. And there, as Ian says, in that case, we use international standards for the data. So there's one agreed way of recording locations of that sort, a standard called OGS 84, and we use that standard which everyone agrees on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the answer. In short, yes, you can use the data. Sometimes you have to do some work to transform it to make it all in the same kind of format.
I guess it's the same. I guess it's the same as that you can use a mobile phone from one manufacturer on the network, and someone else can be using a phone made by a different manufacturer, but it still works, and that's all down to standards too, isn't it? So it's another example.
Europe did well on that standard with GSM. America didn't follow so much; they had problems. But my learned colleagues, they'll remember a time when we used to measure things in feet and inches, and when we've moved to metric, America hasn't, and it was a miss between the two conversions that caused something to crash. Was it on Mars, or it was on the Mars recently? Some lander had collided, and one calculation was in meters per second and one I think was in feet or pounds in kilograms. There was something that got mixed up and it went bang.
Which is a great example of the importance of standards, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A very good example. So we're gonna go from standards to businesses. And Nikolai, earlier in the webinar, you mentioned that smart cities can influence how businesses are run. Can you give some examples of this?
Okay, plenty of examples which John is also aware of, which we developed within the Smart Cities project here in Manchester. The first example is the way parking is allocated. So we had little parking sensors installed in the Manchester Science Park, and that was basically showing the occupancy of the car park, but also how you can allocate and pay for parking at the business. The next one was how you can reduce the number of hot desks you provide for your employees. There were little sensors people would put at the bottom of the hot desking areas, and then if it is occupied, you would know, the sensor will beep. So with using that, you can monitor exactly what is your hot desk occupancy. You can say if the desk in a particular part of the room are never used, and people always tend to use the desks closer to the windows, and that can allow you to change, reduce the number, or probably increase the number of hot desking if that is necessary. We also had examples of sensors deployed in the cold water systems in the buildings, effectively monitoring for Legionnaire's disease. So if Legionnaire's disease can only develop if the water temperature is within certain 2 parameters, and that was actually very useful so that people didn't need to spend that much time and money checking the biochemical tests for Legionnaires' disease and all the rest of it, because they can monitor directly if the water is in the safe area or not. There was another example where we deployed black boxes to reduce the consumption of the buses by monitoring and giving feedback to the bus drivers about how they could drive in a more economical fashion. But interestingly, the business model behind that use case really took off with the taxi companies, again reducing the consumption and so on. We then later on we developed an example about using Internet of Things technology and redirection to monitor and control the flow of traffic associated with organizing events. So that is a new business model there again. So you can use Internet of Things sensors for millions of new interesting things, and some businesses, to make it sustainable, some businesses will have to make money out of it in order for them to provide a continuous service. And we also, one thing we learned on CityVerve, which is the Smart Cities project, is that it doesn't always need to be a business case. It doesn't always need to be a business model. Sometimes you could have a quality of life case. And then the model is related to the quality of life of the citizens in Manchester, and sustainability will come from improving this quality of life and taking the funding from the city council and certain kind of funds in that area. John, do you want to add anything to that, or is it more or less collect record? There was something to do with electric bikes as well. That was an interesting business model as well.
Ice cream.
Go on, Ian, sorry.
Ice creams is a good example for quality of life. So a lot of the firms, if fridges get warm, the ice cream melts. So they were monitoring their fridges from when they were sold. And that's linked now to coronavirus. So if you think about hospitals having lots of fridges, you've got to make sure that they're always at the right low temperatures. And if you get that wrong, then you can lose drugs, you can lose blood products. So we've monitored fridges on our floor, so we could see, Claudia's salad kept going limp and we couldn't work out why. And it was the fridge was set to the wrong temperature.
Yeah. Very good. Very good to see some real life use cases. So a question here, which I think I'm gonna ask you, Ian, and that is a smart home like a smart city? You already mentioned you've got some sensors in your house. So could you have lots of sensors around the home that could learn your movements and care for you and maybe stop people going into care homes?
Yes, and that is something that we've actually done. So if you think about a city being made up of lots of buildings, then as the buildings all get smart and share that data with a data exchange, you can get a lot of benefits. So the amount of energy and water that I'm using in my house should be similar to how my neighbors are using it. So if one of them's different, you can start thinking, is there a leak somewhere? Is something going wrong? But we've been looking at how we do connect to care to help people stay at home longer. Using water flow, electric use, how long it takes people to get downstairs can be an indication of how steady they are on the feet. But when you start building up lots of different users together, you can then start getting rid of the identities, if you like. So you can have traffic light systems. So we're not bothered about tracking individual people. It's just this individual, this home looks a bit different. So we can spend a bit of time to work out what their issues would be. So we had something with looking for those patterns or signatures of activities of daily living. And instead of telling someone that it didn't look like they'd been to the bathroom for 2 days, we could just say, check that person's eating and drinking habits. So the machines took away all of the, the problems with like privacy and security and, getting a bit personal, because you didn't know they'd not been to the toilet for 2 weeks or 2 days, sorry. But it meant you could just say, "Oh, are you eating? Are you drinking? Fine."
Okay, that sounds really, really interesting, really promising for the future. John, one for you here, and that is about sensors. So we've heard about lots of different kinds of sensors. Do they already exist, the kinds of sensors that we need to use for smart cities, or have we had to invent some new ones?
Sensors, there are many, many different types of sensors that already exist. And they've been around for a while, for a few years. I think one of the interesting things about sensors and the way they've changed over the last few years is that they've got smaller and they've got cheaper, and they've needed less and less power to gather the data. And that's one of the things that's meant that smart cities and Internet of Things has really seen a big increase in interest in the last few years, because as sensors get smaller, they're easier to put into the environment, and as they get cheaper, obviously it becomes, you know, more cost effective. You can afford to put them out there. So sensors have always been around. There are lots of types of sensor today, and over time they have got smaller and cheaper, and I would expect that to continue, so that we'll see even more sensors in the future. And I've seen sensors embedded in all kinds of places, so in clothing, in running shoes, even in cattle, so that farmers can track the location of their cattle and even track the temperature of their cattle to check how healthy they are and so on. So sensors are everywhere, and they're getting cheaper and smaller, and the number of sensors is going to increase over time as well.
Thanks, John. And another one here for you, Nikolai, which is around using VR headsets. So could you use the augmented reality features that you get in some of the virtual reality headsets, so that people could actually see the virtual Manchester models while they were really in Manchester?
Yes, theoretically you can do that. I mean, as I said earlier, you have our digital twin in Manchester happens to be developed within Unity. Unity is an environment for building games. We also are now experimenting with Unreal, which is the competitive environment to Unity. And also Unity, both Unity and Unreal support deployment to different devices. So it does take a little bit of a conversion, a little bit of development, mainly on the control side, but it is the same world. So the paradigm there is that you have a world populated by objects, which is the building, the cars, the air pollution, the crime scene, particle models, which kind of indicate where the crime scene is taking place. And that exists in some sort of conceptual space. And your headset, or indeed our DVO, our virtual room in the DVO, navigates through that space. So you can transfer to augmented reality. You can then walk in Manchester and see some of the features superimposed on the real Manchester with you, and actually some people are already doing that. Our specific model will have to be adapted for that in terms of how you control the model and how you navigate. So tracking of the person, where they are, how they use the joystick, because you wouldn't be no longer be using joystick to move around. You actually be walking, but then you need to be tracked with your position and where you're looking in the space. So it's a matter of controls rather than of any other technical issues.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more very quick question before we go. So I think this is probably one for you, Ian, and that is, you mentioned about putting sensors on fridges. Could we put sensors on other fridges and other kinds of appliances to understand and predict when they might fail or go wrong, so we can get a new one or get them fixed before that happens?
Yep. So it's a big thing called predictive maintenance, and it's a big thing where you use artificial intelligence and machine learning to try and work out if something is failing, because it's how it's being used. So a lot of servicing happens every 10,000 miles, 10,000 hours, just because it's what they do. But by looking at vibrations, so accelerometers and 3-axis, the sounds, the temperatures, they can all start getting cleverer. I think a lot of cars do this now, where they will look at the electrical resistance of the oil to work out how much metallic compounds are in there, or the viscosity. So by adding all those together, you can then start learning from everyone else and saying, well, actually, we have to give these services. So yeah, it's a fantastic question. You can do that, and then you could have a lovely VR representation of this thing destroying itself.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. So just before we finish, just want to point you all back to the Virtual British Science Week page for Smart Cities. You will see there are some have a go activities on there, some of which were developed, I can say, by Laura. There are some plugged and some unplugged activities, some ideas of things you might do with sensors, some data that you can have a go at trying to display in different ways, if that's something you'd be interested to do. So go and have a look. There's lots of things on there that you can have a go at. There's even a domino alarm, which I'm quite intrigued about. I might have a go at that later.
It was very fun.
Before we go, I just want to say a huge thank you to John, to Nikolai, to Ian and to Laura, and also to West Suffolk College and STEMtastic for hosting us today. So thank you very much, and we hope we'll see some of you tomorrow for our next live Q&A, which is going to be around creative media. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for the great questions.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you tomorrow, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.